Video. So is everybody good on anarchism? Everybody's good? Yes? Okay. Again, you don't have to believe in these ideas, but hey.
How is time going by so slow?
Alright. So here, again, is your little chart we looked at on Friday. You see on the left, you have different movements, kind of when they all develop. And we haven't gone through everything exactly yet. And you also have kind of the spectrum here, right? So towards the center, you have liberalism, socialism is more to the left, communism is more to the left, anarchism is way left, and you have conservatives and Republicans to the right. So, anyway. Alright. Now we get into communism. Yeah. Radical socialism. Yeah. There you go. Alright. The birth of Marxist socialism, as it's sometimes referred to as, and you will see this phrase. You will see the phrase Marxism used on the test because they do have to distinguish between like what is Marxism versus like other versions of communism later on, as well as socialism too.
Das Capital was really funny to me.
Why? You read it? It's hilarious.
No, the way that it's spelled like
Das Capital. All right. So in the 1840s, France was the center of socialism. Not surprising. So all the socialist ideas were coming out of France in the 1840s. Maybe that's why they lost all the wars after this Napoleon stuff, right? Yeah. A German intellectual, Karl Marx, would take these various strands of socialist thought and develop it into more of a modern ideology. So Karl Marx, who's German, would take these strands of ideas from socialism and weave them into more of a modern ideology. So he creates Marxism. We would just today probably just call it communism. But again, you got to understand too, like his ideas about communism are what he believes works on paper. Has anybody ever tried to actually make a Marxist state? An actual Marxist state? No. Right? So Marxist socialism or Marxism would have a lasting impact on political thought and practice into present day, right? Because you don't have the first countries really attempted since the 19-teens, but it all starts here in the 1840s, essentially, with his ideas. So Marxism calls for a working class revolution. That's a key element. There has to be a revolution. So this calls for a working class revolution to overthrow capitalist society. So what class overtakes society? Proletariat, right? So the proletariat overthrows the bourgeoisie and becomes the dominant class of society. But there has to be a revolution. So a working class revolution has to take place to overthrow capitalist society and create a communist state. So he's not like the socialists who are like, oh, let's go over here and like have a little utopian society. No. We got to overthrow the government, make it better, right? So his background. So he earned a PhD in philosophy. So he is a doctor. It's Dr. Karl Marx. This whole time you've been giving him his undue, right, credence. He turned to journalism. And his articles are very critical about the laboring poor and how they were treated. So he turned to journalism and wrote about how the laboring poor were mistreated by capitalism. Capitalism was bad. Prussian police forced him into exile in the 1840s. So, like, basically, he was kicked out of Germany. So, in the 1840s, he's kicked out of Germany, out of Prussia. He and his family traveled across Europe after getting the help from his friend Frederick Engels. So, his boy, Frederick Engels, helped support his European tour with his family after being kicked out of Prussia. What?
Wait, why did he get kicked out?
Because he was spouting out this, like, revolutionary ideas and criticizing.
Okay, I forgot Germany's not even.
Yeah, so it's kicked out of Prussia, but yeah. So Frederick Engels, his bud from Britain, supports him and his family traveling across Europe. Because basically, with all his very harsh rhetoric and his criticism of his works, he kind of remains a fugitive. Like, basically, his family constantly is forced to move place to place because he keeps getting kicked out of places. So after the revolution is 1848, which let me say this right now, we haven't gotten there yet, but 1848 is like a hot year for revolutions. Okay, so we're not there yet, but it's in this unit. We're getting there. So there's a lot of places that have them that year. So 1848, after 1848, Marx eventually settles in London and spends the rest of his life there advocating for working class revolution. So eventually he settles in London after the 48 revolution. He settles in London and spends the rest of his life there advocating for a working class revolution. So he released his detailed critique of capitalism in his magnum opus, Das Kapital. Right, people, because that's just him by himself. Communist Manifesto came out in the 1840s, and it was written by him and Engels, but it was kind of like the more shortened version of all this. So basically, if you want to think about it like this, the Communist Manifesto that Engels and he write is like his master's thesis, like his main idea, right? Whereas in the 60s, whenever he writes Das Kapital, that's like his PhD, dissertation, right? The whole idea, let me break it down for you how society is bad and why communism is good.
So the Communist Manifesto is like the working man's system.
Exactly. The painful version, right? We can read. Anyway, so let's talk about Marx's ideas. So he learned to apply social science analysis to economic problems. Marx learned to apply social science analysis to economic problems. So he learned to apply social science analysis to economic problems. But he pushed it in radical directions. So he learned to apply social science analysis to economic problems, but pushed it in radical directions. He was influenced by the utopian socialists, but didn't think that was the answer. So he was influenced by the utopian socialist guys and championed their ideas of like social equality and community, but didn't think like the answer is just removing yourself from society, because then you're still leaving these people behind who are still struggling, right? So you got to take that idea and extrapolate it towards society. Society's not going to give in to your idea, so you got to do what? You got to shove it down their throat, right? So you got to force them to accept your ideas. And that's where the revolution comes in, right? So he criticized utopian scholars as unrealistic. And his contribution is that basically he goes back in history and reframes history through economics. That's why he's so influential, is that he basically goes back kind of as a history person and goes back in society and looks and says, look, history is a study of economics. It's always the haves versus the have-nots. And he goes back throughout history, kind of gives multiple examples of this being the case. So he shapes history and its patterns and purpose towards socioeconomic problems. Like, it's not about politics and kings and acts and all these other things. It's about economics. The haves and the have-nots. Exactly. That's why the capitalism man is trying to keep you down, right? Trying to keep you away from these ideas of revolution. But that's not true. I taught free enterprise or economics. We didn't talk about that stuff. It's all about how capitalism's good, not about how it's bad, right? So he argued class struggle over economic wealth was the great engine of human history. He argued that class struggle over economic wealth was the great engine of human history. He argued that class struggle over economic wealth was the great engine of human history. One class had always exploited the other. Spoiler alert, it's the bourgeoisie and the aristocrats.
Great industry, what?
He argued that class struggle over economic wealth was the great engine of human history. Like, what drove history, basically, was class struggle over wealth. So he, in a lot of ways, introduces these two terms. So he develops these terms, bourgeoisie and proletariat, and these are the terms that he uses in his manifesto and his works. So the bourgeoisie, so we're going to redefine them again. Bourgeoisie were middle-class minority who owned the means of production. So remember that not everybody in the middle class were like the head honchos. Bourgeoisie that he's talking about here are like the middle-class folks who own the factories and also own the means of production. Because that's another thing he always talks about. It's all about who owns the means of production, right? And the working class should be the ones who seize the means of production. And he believed the bourgeoisie exploited the working class proletariat. So bourgeoisie were a middle class minority who owned the means of production, who Marx believed exploited the working class proletariat. And so proletariat are the working class who, according to Marx, were unfairly exploited by bourgeoisie. So proletariat were the exploited working classes exploited by the bourgeoisie. And this is the two guys. This is Karl Marx here. It's a little bit younger version of Karl Marx here and here, and then his buddy Friedrich. So Friedrich Engels was himself a son of a wealthy industrialist. So, all right, revolutionary program. Revolutionary program. So over time, he argued that the proletariat would grow even larger and poorer, feeling more alienated, and thus leading more likely a revolution. Basically, they're just going to get bigger and bigger, and they're going to get more alienated and pissed off. Wealth gap will grow, and they're just going to overthrow they're going to overthrow everything. Revolution. They would develop basically a class consciousness of revolution because they're going to be so indignant about how they're mistreated that they're going to revolt. Do you feel like this is at all true? Even now? 200 years later?
They didn't make a minimum wage, yeah, sure.
So minimum wage basically resolves that? But is minimum wage not high enough right now?
Yeah, definitely.
It's okay. Look, you want to say something?
I will be quiet.
Okay.
No, say something.
Come on, Jared.
I will be quiet.
Come on, Jared.
Oh.
Speak. No one wants
Speak.
I am not going to speak
your
on
piece.
this matter.
All right.
Speak your mind. No one wants that.
All right. We'll stop second video there.